Let's continue with our discussion on intervention. We've talked about setting goals and some of the laws concerning intervention. Now we'll discuss general intervention techniques and considerations for different age levels. The purpose of intervention is to teach or increase an overall skill or behavior that is not occurring and should be occurring more frequently. It can also be to decrease, change, or eliminate behaviors that inhibit or reduce communication and learning opportunities. When teaching a new skill, there are a couple of different stages that you want to consider. First, the cognitive stage refers to the time when the child is acquiring or learning the new skill that you're trying to teach. Okay, this is the stage where it's not going to be easy for the child because of the fact that they are just acquiring or learning the new skill. During this stage, it's important that the clinician is aware of the prompt and hierarchy and the level of support that they provide to the child. That's going to help them monitor the progress in learning that new skill. So, as you have to provide less and less prompts and less support, that means that that skill is closer to being acquired or learned by the student. So if I go from having the child having to imitate me to where if I show the child a picture to prompt them to say that word, that's a whole lot less support. And so the child is getting better and better at having and showing that skill. And in addition to, as far as, whether it's maximum support or if I just have to do a cue, if I just have to give the child a look or a tap to use a certain word, again, that child at that level of support is changing and the child is beginning to get to learn or acquire the new skill. So that is the cognitive stage. The fixation stage is about proficiency and stabilization of the skills that the child just learned. So at that point, you want to make sure that you are fading your prompts and reinforcement so that the new skills provide their own natural motivation. So, and essentially, the child isn't doing it because I've asked them to do it. They're doing it now because of the reward they get from communicating with others and getting their needs met because they're using this new communication skill, or either being able to demonstrate their knowledge, to show their interest, whatever it is now giving them natural motivation in order to use this particular skill. And so that's the fixation stage where you're fading prompts, you're backing away from giving them as much support. And then there is the automatic stage, the autonomous stage, which is basically where they generalize the skill to other settings, other people, and context. And that's ultimately our goal. That's what we want, is that they get to the point where they can use this skill spontaneously on their own without prompting in the community, at home, with their parents, with their teacher, with their daycare provider, whoever's we're in contact with this child, they're able to show and demonstrate the particular communication skill. So let's talk about the prompt and hierarchy. And this is from least to most support. So this is what I mean when I say you want to keep track of how much support you're giving the child and where you are on the prompt and hierarchy. So it's this is all about the level of support you're going to be providing the child in order to complete the language task when they're acquiring a new skill. The first on the hierarchy, remember this is from least to most support, and you want to always try to get away with being able to offer the least amount of support and still get the skill or the response to come about. You want to then increase support as you feel as necessary. But and when you first start off, you might go ahead and give the most support, see how they do, and then back off quickly and see, hey, the less and less support I give them, they really don't need all of this support. So you may see, okay, well, they can give me this response or get this correct with just me giving them a verbal prompt. Great. So, those are the types of things you'll kind of work through in the hierarchy when you're first teaching a skill. So, first on the hierarchy prompt, and it's also the least amount of support, is just wait time. So, you may provide them with a question or a picture and just wait. And see what they say. It's just what it says. You provide them with some type of stimulus, wait, give the child a time to process it and come up with a response. Next, you have verbal prompts, which could include a question. So, say for example, you're working on the functions with clothing. Okay, so you may place pictures of a hat, a shirt, and a shoe in front of the child, and your stimulus might be something like, find something I can wear to keep the sun out of my eyes or keep my ears warm. And that's your question. And so let's just say the child doesn't give you anything or kind of looks puzzled a little bit. Then you might give a little bit more of a supportive prompt and say, okay, well, what do you wear on your head? I need a thing that can go on my head. Okay. And then, let's say that they, um, you know, still have difficulty with that. Then you may just, you know, give them a phonemic cue, or something like that, and say, well, the thing I'm looking for starts with the h, or something like that. And you may wait, or you may just have to tell the child what to do. And that's like your next level of a verbal prompt, and that's something like, hey, give me the hat, or can you give me the hat? And if you want the child to name it, I need a hat. So tell me hat. Okay. Then you could have visual prompts. So in that example, you may actually provide the child with a picture or visual hint, such as patting your head, to try to get the child to come up with the actual thing that you want. Another and more support would be then to give the child some type of model and let them imitate. So you may pick up the hat card, and then put it down and ask the stimulus again. So you may say, okay, what do you wear on your head? Or what's something that can keep your ears warm? And then you pick up the card with the hat on, show it to the child, put it back down, and then ask the prompt again. Um, and then or you can actually then say the word and give the child a chance to imitate. Hat. This is a hat, or I need hat. Give me the hat. Okay. And then physical assistance is the most supportive help you can give, and that's the most maximum prompt that you can also give as well. So think of these as kind of going together hand in hand, level of support and types of prompts. So this is often the case for some of our students who are lower functioning, where you literally have to hand over hand the child. That's what that HOH stands for. So you might place your hand over the child and help them provide you or touch or pick up the correct picture. So that's the most amount of support. So if you're working with a child that's lower functioning and then you realize you're there in their cognitive stage of learning the skill, to learn what a hat is, or learn hat, and you've seen it in a couple of months, or in a month, where they've gone from you having to physically put their hand on the picture, and give it to you, to where all you have to do is say, I need the thing that goes on my head, and they can actually pick it up on their own and give it to you. That lets you know that child is learning that particular word, that skill. They're getting better. um, with regards to self-help skills, um, some things we may do, may be to teach the skills, using a chaining method. Okay. And that's, where you actually may be teaching skills that have many components. So, an example of a chaining method, or using chaining, would be trying to teach a child to tie his or her shoe, or the steps for taking a bath or washing your hands. This is used a lot by occupational therapists for self help skills, and they may provide us, or I'm sorry, they may ask us to reinforce the steps or provide the student with strategies for remembering the steps. So there are two ways you can use chaining. You can start forward, where there's steps starting. You start at the beginning and you teach each step in sequence and reward the child for learning each step. Or you can go backwards, where you start at the end and you regress back to the original step. And again, we can do things like provide visual and picture cues, phonemic cues, things like that, to help the child remember the actual steps, in that particular process. So here is an example, of what you might show a child when you're asking them out of a field of three. So that's an example of, what you actually might show a child. And you can make your own picture cards and stimulus books and things like that. You really can. You don't have to always go out there and buy these materials. And so, that's just an example of, hey, I'm working on clothing and functions of clothing. I've got my shirt, my hat, and my shoe. And there's a lot of things I can do to help that child establish some vocabulary that may be an important part of their dressing routine, or of a routine that they may have at home. So, some examples of interpreting what's considered um, level of assistance. It's a little bit subjective, because a lot of times you will see clinicians write goals where they say that, the child will do such and such task with 80% accuracy with minimum assistance or prompts. Um, it's subjective and it's not necessarily set in stone, but you can use these type of things as a rule of thumb when you're thinking about writing goals and how much support you'll need. So, one of the things you can think about, and so when we talk about the hierarchy of prompts, you want to think about that hierarchy I just showed you. Is it a verbal, or is it a physical prompt? And then when you're thinking about support, you also want to keep in mind, how many prompts do I have to give them? And again, do I have to give them an easier prompt versus I'm sorry, do I have to give them a less um, a least, well, let's put it this way: do I have to give them a prompt that provides the least support, or do I have to give them a prompt that provides the most support? So this is kind of a rule and thumb you can use for kind of interpreting level of support or prompts. One way to look at minimum assistance may be, one to two verbal cues, whereas moderate assistance may be verbal and visual cues in about two to three of them. And then maximum assistance or prompts may be where you have to combine a number of types, different types of prompts, ranging from verbal, visual, and model or physical. And some clinicians like to always start off with the least amount of support, or and then move up if they have to. They want to see what the child can do with just a verbal, then they'll move to visual, and then they'll move to a model or a physical prompt if they have to. And that's all. And if you work in that type of hierarchy, you do always kind of give the child a chance to provide you with the response with the least amount of support. But you want to keep track of whether or not you have to combine and go down the hierarchy, and how many of those different prompts you have to do. And so the more that you have to combine, of course, you're going to be increasing your number of prompts to something like 3 and 4. So those are different rules of thumbs that you can use for prompting and level of support. Now let's talk about response complexity. Um, when it comes to receptive language, and we've talked about this already a little bit when we talked about assessment, but when it comes to receptive language, the easiest thing you can do is to ask the child to point to something, okay? And then the next most complex thing you could do is to ask the child to follow directions and act out some type of instruction. And then finally, asking a child to make judgments about what's right and what's wrong is one of the more complex type of responses that a child could give you with regards to working on their receptive language. So this holds true not only in assessment, but it also holds true in intervention as well. And then the same thing with expressive language, going from the easiest task, or the least complex task, to the most complex task. Looking here, you see the child imitating you is the easiest task that you can ask them to do. Delayed imitation would be the next easiest. Asking them to complete some type of carrier phrase, so to complete an incomplete sentence, etc., would be the next level. And then parallel sentence production, where the clinician completes one and the child completes one with a similar structure, is another example, or the next example of complexity. And then finally, having the child to give you some type of narrative, or explain something, summarize something, etc. An open conversation would be, one of the more complex tasks that you can ask them to do in expressive language. Now, in therapy, we often have to use or incorporate AAC systems. AAC stands for Alternative Augmentative Communication Systems. And this is for children who have yet to develop verbal language, but we're trying to provide them with some type of tool for communication. And so many, of the children you may work with may use AAC systems. So as you go over, over time, you're going to hear more information about that. But it would be beneficial for you to learn about the different types of AA systems that are out there. So with AAC systems, it's basically a tool. It is a tool. And so it does not replace the child's actual skills. It is a tool that the child uses to demonstrate the skills that are in their head that they're not able to verbalize, if that makes sense. It's used to demonstrate the knowledge that's in their heads that they're not able to physically verbalize. So think of it like that. Okay, so with that said, any AAC system we set up for a child, we want it to match that child's developmental level, because we're trying to have it match what's in the child's head and the child's knowledge, so that they can use that tool to express their knowledge. It's not about expressing our knowledge, it's about expressing their knowledge. It should also include words from a variety of semantic and syntactic categories because we want to make sure that we give them an opportunity to truly express themselves and have a diverse number of options available to them to express themselves. And we want to make sure we give them an opportunity to say the things that a typical child would say for their age. Teenagers, you know, often use different slangs and different expressions. OMG and oh, I'm so done with you, or things like that. We want to give these kids, if and these students that we may be working with, if that is at their level, the developmental level, and appropriate for their peer group, we want to give them that opportunity to use those same expressions. um, and also, the AA system that you set up for your student should be easy to use and access for the child. If it is not easy to use, you may find it underneath the bed at home and nobody's using it. So you want to make sure that it's a good fit and match for that child and their family. It should enable the child to be understood by a variety of communication partners, and it should provide motivation to use for use of the system in response to natural cues in everyday settings. You can find this. You can follow this link, and I'll also put it on Courseden to see an example of AAC system use. Okay. Um, so let's talk about ways that you get language and word use out of children. There are a couple of little tricks that you can use to do that, particularly with young children who may not respond as easily to you, just saying, hey, do this for me, or say this, or tell me this. Okay. Some of the things you can do is to violate a routine or expectation. So omit a step in a routine. An example of that, and just see if the child is going to correct you or tell you that you missed something or you forgot to do something. So an example of that may be something simple like, going to, wash your hands in the sink in the classroom. And so, you get over there and you start using the sink, and, say the child's been learning the steps to washing their hands appropriately. And so you use the sink and you wash your hands off, and then you walk away with wet hands. You don't use the paper towel to dry your hands out. But you do that on purpose because you want to see if the child's going to say, wait, paper towel, or dry your hands, or you forgot, or something like that. So that's an example of violating a routine or expectation. You can do things like, and again, this is like your playful forgetfulness and things like that. You're doing it in a playful way, but again, you're trying to secretly sabotage and elicit um, um, communication from the child. So you can do things like misplace or misuse objects, or use forgetfulness, like, oh, I forgot, can you help me? And because that may be naturally motivating for the child, because they get to have a little bit of power or demonstrate their knowledge to this, adult that has forgotten. Woo, big deal, right? Additionally, you could do things like just be silent. Silence is golden. Sometimes I often see that in new clinicians, and even in when I've from time to time supervised graduate clinicians, where they are talking so much that the client can just sit back. They don't have to talk. And they don't really get a chance to talk, so they just let the clinician talk for them. And I tell them, you know what, this isn't your speech therapy session. You have speech. You got good communication, so you want to make sure you give that client lots of opportunity to talk. Sometimes you've got to be silent. You can do things like place things in sight but out of reach. And then also consider movement. I have a lot of OTs that swear by getting the child into different things like swings and on trampolines to jump and things like that. And a lot of times it's highly motivating for the child, and a lot of times it'll may naturally produce some language like whoa and uh oh, or I jump, and you can make a song to go along with it. So there are a lot of different types of techniques you can use there. To facilitate language, and again, expand on the child and help the child refine their language. We've talked about these type of strategies in language acquisition, so I'm not going to talk about them a whole lot, but you can do things like following comments, which is basically where you talk about what the child is doing. It's called, another term for it is focus stimulation. And you're just basically, hey, I see that you are playing with the doll. Now you're putting her in her bed. Oh, did she fall out of the bed? She just fell out of the bed. You're just talking and going along about what the child does. And this is really helpful for those kids who won't talk to you. You talk to them and you just talk about the things that they're doing. So when you have those kids who just cannot talk, can't give you anything back, and you waited and you waited, and it's just like crickets and you hear nothing, you want to use that type of language facilitation strategy. For those kids who do give you some things back, use your expansion and extension and recast techniques and things like that. And then you want to do things like build ups and breakdowns where the child is, where you may build the child's utterance up, or you may break the child's utterance down. Okay, and it's similar to a technique that we've talked about called vertical structuring. When you're planning your intervention, there are a couple of different service delivery options you want to consider and take a look at. First, you want to figure out what format you're going to be using for intervention for a particular child, whether or not that child is going to be seen for treatment in a one on one setting or individual therapy or as part of a group. Often in the schools, children are seen as part of a group, but depending on the skills that they need to learn, or the severity level, this may not always be the best situation for every child. You also want to consider the provider who's going to be providing the treatment. Will it be you as the SLP, or will you be training someone else to do the intervention, or the caregiver to do the intervention? Sometimes this situation may occur. There are actually some parent training or parent intervention training models out there where SLPs train the parents to become the interventionists, particularly in early intervention and with young children. But many researchers do argue that this has to be done with a lot of support if you're going to have other people to produce or to deliver the intervention, with a lot of, so it had to be a lot of support and monitoring that's happening, that the correct thing and targets are being targeted, etc. Um, Also, the dosage, which is about the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of the service. So, are you going to see the child 3 weeks for 30 minutes, or are you going to see them for 2 weeks and only 15 minutes? Are you going to be working with them one on one, or are you going to be working with them as a consultative model, where maybe you go into the classroom and again you train the teacher, or you help the teacher to implement, certain types of modifications or techniques and things like that. Timing is also important. And so, when you are working with a child, you want to, consider how long they've had the diagnosis. So, when you are starting with a child that's newly diagnosed, you may um, you know, consider the fact that this child's going to be learning a lot of skills that they've never learned before, haven't had intervention on before. Whether it, with regards to whether or not it's further out from the diagnosis, then you may think about, okay, well, this child has been in therapy a long time. You may also consider whether or not you're going to see plateau effects where the child's not making gains for certain skills, or whether or not the child's motivation is going to be the same. So those type of things come into play when we're talking about timing, and that's the timing of the intervention relative to the diagnosis, and how long the child's been in therapy, receiving therapy, may have an impact on a lot of different factors. And then the setting, whether or not you're going to be doing intervention at home, as in early intervention, or community based setting, the daycare, or at their school. In general, some of the intervention goals for preschoolers, and again, is their school age kids, um, is, to think about phonological awareness, skills, rhyming, blending, segmenting. These things are important for later literacy and reading skills and abilities. Thinking about print awareness. Also, wanting to build print awareness, decrease any phonological processes they may have going on when it comes to sound production and oral speech. You may also want to work on doing things like increasing the size of their vocabulary. For preschoolers, we still think a lot of about routines, because routines are part of their day to day activities, and it's easier for children, young children, to learn vocabulary that is associated with their routines. Increasing understanding and range of semantic relationships. Again, that's just one way of building their vocabulary. Facilitating the acquisition of age appropriate morphemes, making sure they've got the morphemes in place that should be in place. Increasing their utterance and sentence length complexity. If they're still at a two-word utterance level, that can be problematic, because between 3 and 5, we're expecting their utterances to be a lot longer. Increasing the flexibility of language in various contexts, whether they're with their peers, having them to even understand that you use language in different ways when you talk to your peers than when you talk to your teachers, and things like that. That stuff starts to come into play even as early as 4 and 5. Using manner words. We're in the South, and that's very, very important. So you know a lot of parents are very intent on teaching their children to say yes ma'am or no sir, for when they're talking to adults and things like that, and also saying thank you and no thank you, things like that. Increase in imaginative play activities to practice language skills is important. So we cannot ignore the importance of play, even at the ages between 3 and 5. Children are still playing, and that's still very important. And then also improving their overall conversational skills, their turn taking, their maintenance of conversation, and then developing those narrative skills. We've talked about the importance of those skills as well. Now, when we're talking about intervention for children who are in the elementary school age, at the elementary school age level, these are kids between the ages of 5 and 10. We want to address a little bit more complex skills. So, we definitely want to be addressing and promoting literacy skills. We want to help them to improve their vocabulary, particularly vocabulary that is curriculum related, because one of our jobs in the school system is to help children access their curriculum and to be able to learn from the curriculum. We want to improve their depth of understanding and use of words. So, this is where we start to go into the depth of vocabulary, and understanding, that we can have subtle differences between words, and categories of words, and increasing the diversity of the words that fit into categories, so that it can look like more and more that of a system of adults, more and more similar to that the system that adults have, in terms of vocabulary categorization. So understanding subtle differences between words such as warm and hot, understanding abstract vocabulary and figurative speech and vocabulary. And we've talked about what those are and what they look like. We want to teach them to monitor their own comprehension and request for clarification. So if they don't understand something, to have the wherewithal to ask the questions or initiate asking a question to get understanding. And then we also want to teach them to paraphrase information, summarize things, because these are the skills that they're going to be using later on for writing, and for narratives and things like that. And then we'll be looking also at advanced morphology skills, teaching them different prefixes and suffixes. That's going to help a whole lot when it comes to reading, because they'll be able to break down some of those longer words just based upon knowing some of the prefixes and suffixes. We want to also teach types of sentences, declaratives, questions, things like that, and then also complex sentence structures. So things like compound and dependent clauses as well. And then the other thing is we do want to continue to work on narrative skills, because again, that's such a important part of um, um, elementary learning and skills and etc., and then helping them with conversational repair, initiation, and maintenance of conversation, those pragmatic skills. That's also still very important. So the narrative skills continue to be important, and even and them being able to produce more and more complex narratives, and then conversational repair, interacting with their peers, initiating conversation and maintaining conversation if they have issues with that. That's also very, very important. Now let's talk about intervention for adolescents. This is where a lot of those complex skills start to really come into play. And this includes children between the ages of 11 and young adults up to 21. And you've heard probably the term or the phrase at where children reach a certain point where they're no longer learning to read, but they're now reading to learn. And this is in that within when that turnaround happens, it happens a lot of times in this age range. And so you're talking about pretty complex skills that are being expected from adolescents. So things like making inferences just based upon bits and pieces of information, identifying main ideals in passages and paragraphs, understanding and deciphering complex words, and then using those organizing type of behaviors to allow for them to plan their own schedules, and plan how to get work done and homework done and things like that. You'll be surprised that we often help kids with these types of behaviors, because they are, there's a lot of language behind these types of behaviors, and especially internal language behind these types of behaviors. So using things like checklists, planners, graphic organizers, and then evaluating and revising written work, code switching for writing. So, understanding that they can't write the way that they speak, and that writing is much more formal than spoken language. Being able to use technology to access and share information. We're in a technology age, and these children need to be able to know the steps to getting on a computer and getting to a Word program, or to Excel, or all of those other different things, getting online. How do I type in the right phrase to get the type of search results back that I'm looking for? So being able to use those type of things, we may very well be helping them with that type of task. And then vocational services. Again, I talked about that transitional, that planning for transitions, and this is especially important for these older kids. So we do it at the early age where we transition them out of early intervention, and then we also do it at these older ages because we have to transition them into some type of vocation if they're not necessarily going to be a child that is able to go away to college or to go to a community college, etc. So then we want to make sure that we prepare them to have some type of skill or vocation or be able to follow instructions so that they may work at maybe a restaurant, a grocery store, or etc. And be able to earn some money and be productive members of society. So that's part of our charge as speech pathologists to get some kids. We know that not all of the children that we work with will be able to access and participate in like a college curriculum, a college setting, etc. But it doesn't mean that we can't help them in preparing them for those vocational settings and services as well. So that's part of what we do as well.